Welcome, everyone. So Chris Cook is a hands-on technical and business development professional with expertise in FPGA design, embedded and edge AI systems at Macnica Americas. Macnica specializes in helping customers solve complex embedded challenges from architecture selection and system integration to bringing up high-performance vision and AI solutions from concept to deployment. Chris has a very strong engineering background and a customer-first mindset, bridging the gap between technical requirements and real-world results. Welcome, Chris. And then we have David Pierson. You've probably met or seen David Pierson in Connect Tech's and CTI Labs videos or working trade show booths and showing off our demos all over the world. David leads the SAE team at Connect Tech and is instrumental in solving issues and in training. He's the go-to for info in the office and is an invaluable resource for the marketing team. He's technical, authentic, and very passionate about tech. And I'm Carrie Nelms from Connect Tech, and I thought we would have a conversation about our Falcon Vehicle System. It's generating a lot of buzz. So let's jump right in. David, if you can take me back, what problem was Falcon actually designed to solve, and where did the concept start?
Yeah, absolutely. So Connect Tech has always been really driven to listen to our customers, get feedback, and implement that in future designs. So Falcon was ultimately customer driven, and we had a lot of interest around the idea of small form factor, rugged, primarily for construction, mining, and automotive applications. And we really took feedback. Well, across all our products, we do that, but in this case, we really took that feedback to heart and really designed a whole system around that. So it's intended to be, again, very small form factor, relatively lightweight. It can be mounted to the exterior or interior of heavy equipment for, AI inferencing, visual ingestion, being able to hook up cameras and also link with other systems around the vehicle through T1 Ethernets or CAN, that sort of thing. So really ground up development with customers in mind and those specific use cases.
That it's really interesting, sort of how we've evolved. So I'm going to ask you, Chris, from your position working with customers on the application side, what makes Falcon interesting and the right product to get behind?
Well, I mean, like David just mentioned, the fact that it's rugged and built really for the industrial environment, the wide temperature range, high shock vibe, and then the long product life cycle that Connect Tech has. Another reason is the modular PCI-based architecture. You can plug in different cards, you can add features, you can subtract features, so you can really make it fit for your exact design. And then, the third thing is really just people like David, their expertise and their ability to support these products, second to none in terms of being able to help my customers and help me position it correctly into the right opportunities.
That's great. He's a rock star for sure. When a customer comes to you evaluating like edge AI platforms for a vehicle program, what's the conversation usually about and how does Falcon really change it?
Well, initially, anytime people are looking at edge AI, if in a rugged environment, they're worried about can it really handle the real world conditions? The vibration, the temperatures, especially because these boards aren't cool. So, I mean, you've got to solve the temperature problem and then also deal with the environment, the dust and all the other things that go along with being in vehicles, poor power, lots of different issues there. And, having a system that is reliable, can work in with a lot of different cameras. And then finally is how risky is this? How hard is this going to be? Is it really ready for prime time? And I think that's where the Falcon comes into play and what we're really seeing success with this in terms of actually having a fully ruggedized system for customers.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Now, when you say it's not cool, you mean temperature, because clearly it's pretty cool, right?
Yeah,
So,
correct. Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So, as the FAA manager, what does your team actually do to help a customer get from, let's say, evaluation to a working deployment on Falcon?
Well, typically, it's always this. Everything looks good on the PowerPoint, right? Everything runs great until you actually get it in the field. So, the what we try to do is work through the evaluation process. Taking the eval kits, taking the boards to the customer so they can, run their models, benchmark the system, check for the thermal behaviors in their lab, make sure that's all solid. And part of that is validation, is making sure everything works the way it's supposed to work. We can talk to the Wi-Fi cards. We can talk to everything. Everything works as expected. And then you integrate all that together with their software and what they're trying to actually accomplish. And then, deploying. How do I get this into the final system? We help out with design reviews. We help out with, mapping the system to make sure it works the way they planned it to work. And then obviously working with the ConnectTech support people makes it very easy for us to do that as a team.
Thank you. And then if you look at sort of who the demographic is for this, you're looking at agriculture, construction, mining. There are three very different industries with different integration requirements. How do you see the adoption path playing out differently across them?
All markets are a little different. Some of them are faster to market. Like agriculture is not as, no one's going to die in agriculture. So the focus is like on weed detection, autonomous guidance. The design cycle is a little shorter because it doesn't take as much testing as opposed to like a construction environment where safety is a big deal. Proximity, location, are people in the right place? Obviously trying to avoid collisions, all those kinds of things. Very important in construction. And then you also have in construction more shock and vibe and safety requirements and things like that. So it takes longer for those types of systems. And I think mining is not a lot of mining accounts, but in general, they take even longer because they're looking at 24/7 operation. Reliability is a big deal. So that often takes even longer from that standpoint. But the reality is for all of these markets is once you can show a customer a solid platform that can exist in their environment, they want to start looking at it and figuring out how to use it best in their designs.
Yeah, that's great. There's a lot of it's very different when you're on top of the ground versus beneath the ground. And, I think it's really important for that to know that it works in sort of different environments, obviously having the rugged capability and different temperatures and that kind of thing. So, David, most compute platforms don't survive heavy equipment environments long enough to prove anything. What does it take to actually stay safe and alive on a machine day after day?
Yeah, absolutely. Having those rugged platforms is really where ConnectTech steps in. That's where I think we've found our niche, if you will. Everything is rugged, everything's intended to be deployed in the field. But for the Falcon system, where it's really taking that to the next level, IP67 sealing, that sort of thing, it starts in the design phase. This has to be done very intentionally. You can't do it retroactively. It has to happen from the very start, which is where that kind of customer-driven design phase comes into play, where we're receiving feedback on where people are hoping to implement this. And when we hear something like construction, heavy equipment, mining, that's when we really take a look at how we're going to develop this from the hardware up and then into the mechanical as well. So it really starts again from that design phase and making very intentional decisions early on to have it survive essentially, and that's exactly what we've done with Falcon here.
That's great. And you mentioned IP67, and it's fully fanless as well as in the same system. Were there any engineering trade-offs that made it force, and how did you all solve them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thankfully, we were able to employ ConnectTech's, 40 years of history and also 15 years in the Jetson space to mitigate any of those typical trade-offs you generally find with these more rugged systems where it is fanless. So, our fantastic mechanical team kind of helped guide that through to ensure the system's staying cool. From a trade-off perspective, really not much for the customer, though. You will be using locking connectors, which, while not typical, it does ensure that the system does stay alive. Those standard PC style connectors tend to not fare the best, which is why again, very intentional decision to use stuff like the amp seal connector, locking FACRA for the cameras, the GMSL, as well as M12 for the base T Ethernet. Those are all very intentional, but it does mean that you can't necessarily use traditional desktop style connectors like RJ45, base USBs, that sort of thing. But again, it's just one of those things we did from the very get-go to ensure that it survives in those harsh environments.
That's great. The connector, I guess, would be an issue, something that, some of us may not have considered is, certainly the vibration and, the elements getting in there. So thanks for pointing that out. What's the difference between a product that's production ready and one that's just demo ready? Where does that line sort of sit?
Yeah, again, I think that really speaks to where ConnectTech tends to step in for our customers as they're kind of moving to production. A lot of our customers generally start with the NVIDIA Developer Kit, which is really it's a demo system, right? You get the standard PC style connectors. NVIDIA says that it can basically change at any time without notice, so it's just not intended for a production environment, but it's great to do some proof of concept, set up demos, make sure your software stack's working, but it's just not something you're going to deploy into the field. It's essentially a bare board. They have a very nice mechanical design, particularly for their Thor. It looks great, but it's not necessarily going to go into heavy equipment where it's being rattled around. It's out in the elements. It's being rained on. It's mud's being thrown everywhere. That sort of environment is, again, where ConnectTech really steps in. And that next level is going to production ready, where now you have a full IP67 enclosed design, fanless system, the amp seal connectors, these kind of specialized locking connectors. Again, that's where you start to transition into production ready, where it starts to mesh a little more with the customer's end application. We really try to meet the customer where they are, not forcing them into a position maybe they don't want to be in with the hardware. So that's where that amp seal comes in. That's where the locking M12s come in. It's just, again, meeting the customer where they are in a production environment.
That's great. So then that sort of brings the next question, which is, what's actually running on Falcon in a real deployment? And does the Edge AI stack look like on a job site?
Yeah, it varies quite a bit based on what people are trying to do. I will say, because we have those 4 GMSL camera inputs, we have a lot of people doing computer vision. The fact that you have 4 GMSL on an Orin NX system is a really fantastic capability. It means you can effectively enable 360 vision. So if you think in an automotive application or heavy-duty mining equipment or construction, that 360 vision could not only potentially help that equipment navigate in an autonomous sense, or if the application is more safety focused, it can help with person detection and running an AI stack that's really tailored around ensuring a safe working environment. And then again, because Falcon is really intended to be dropped right into these kind of heavy machinery and whatnot, it also has all the CAN base T1 automotive Ethernet as well as M12 base T Ethernet. So we're seeing a lot of kind of interconnectivity with those vehicle systems, and the Falcon is processing all that data within the customer's AI stacks. So some really interesting things, and I'm excited to see kind of where customers start to go with it, because I'm sure there's something I'm not thinking of that they'll find a use for.
I know that at ConnectTech, we've had a lot of people reach out with some really interesting ideas of sort of where they want to go, like even in sort of aviation and things like that. So it'll be very, very interesting in the next, 6 months to really see where everything, like where it's all going everywhere. But, there's been some questions about why Jetson Orin NX and what does super mode unlock that changes, sort of the
Yeah,
possibility.
absolutely. So starting with the NX side of things, really the intention here is to have something as small a form factor as possible. On the AGX side, we have our Anvil RX as well as the upcoming Sentry X2. Those are really the AGX, the big, the bulky, the ultimately the most powerful systems that can be deployed in very similar environments. But we recognize that sometimes that size, and in some cases, customers don't even need that level of compute offered by the AGX Orin. So the NX is really a great avenue for people that maybe don't need all that compute. that the AGX offers and are looking for something very small form factor. So that's where the NX really finds its home, is super small form factor, and being able to kind of fit anywhere. Falcon is a very small IP67 product, so that's kind of where that's positioned. Super mode is an interesting one because it's effectively a boost to the CPU clocks. It unlocks the full performance of the Orin NX, so that super mode, of course, is more or less recently introduced by NVIDIA, and the idea here is we're just overclocking the system, pushing it to the absolute maximum, making sure that customers running more intensive AI applications or ingesting more video and trying to do some processing with it, they just have more resources available on the compute module to handle all that. So it's really cool, and it's neat they are able to kind of implement that super mode only from a software perspective.
Yeah, it's really interesting, like how much power one needs, for different sort of applications. So, but when you're looking at sort of in-cabin AI assistance without any sort of cloud connection, it sounds pretty straightforward, but what makes it genuinely hard to pull off?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's where Edge AI really comes into play. You think of where a Falcon may be deployed. If it's in a mining environment or a construction environment, it's not necessarily going to have reliable Wi-Fi or reliable Ethernet, or any way of kind of interfacing with more data center centric solutions. I think a lot of people take ChatGPT, Claude, that sort of thing for granted just because it is always available in a work environment, but that's where you have a stable network connection. But when you're out in the mine in the middle of nowhere, that's just not the case. So that's where Edge AI comes in. That's where the Falcon comes in. But the trick there is you need to find a way to condense everything that server architecture can really do, something like a ChatGPT, and how do you bring that into an edge system that's not much bigger than the palm of my hand? That is where Orin NX again I think really excels, and really the whole Jetson line of products. So it can be a challenge, being able to fine tune models and trim the fat where you don't need it, and kind of understanding how to use NVIDIA's toolkit and implementing all of this in a localized environment. But thankfully we have CTI Labs who is here to help our customers and bridge that gap, and make sure they can get the Falcon and hit the ground running as soon as possible with kind of this optimized Edge AI stack.
That's great. And can you just explain quickly who CTI Labs is?
Yeah, of course, of course. So the way I like to describe it, Connect Tech has been doing hardware for 41 years now, NVIDIA Jetson for 15. But we've always kind of primarily been a hardware company. Of course, we support all the BSPs and firmware and driver development for our Jetson platforms, but where CTI Labs comes in is it's here to bridge the gap into the application layer, supporting our customers and, again, fine-tuning models, building applications, and really letting them and enabling them to hit the ground running with whatever they need. So CTI Labs is here to work alongside our customers, more or less as an engineering resource. So again, they can hit the ground running when they need to, and they know that they are working with the best of the best, and they're fully leveraging the capabilities of the Jetson module.
Yeah, it's really neat that we have AI architects here, in the beginning of the game kind of thing. So that's
Yep.
lucky, which, sort of begs the next question, which is, you know, when there's customers, especially in sort of heavy equipment or mining, agriculture, um, where do they think they need to start versus what we've learned and where they should actually end up starting?
Yeah, I think again, so many of our customers just have fantastic applications, and it's really interesting to hear kind of their story and their path through the whole thing. I do find that a lot of people tend to look at the application before the hardware, but the hardware is just so critical. You start looking at what interconnects are available. How can we be ingesting cameras? The hardware plays such a central role in what that end application ends up looking like, that I think that's a really, really important place to start is, what are we actually going to be running this thing on? And again, bridging that gap CTI Labs and Connect is here to provide both the hardware and the software side of things. So, that's very exciting, that we have that level of expertise in-house and are able to provide that sort of guidance. But yeah, I think looking at the hardware and kind of building everything up around that, because now you have a better sense of what the full capabilities are, all the interconnect you need, and maybe starting with hardware like the Falcon, there are ways to do things a little easier than maybe it was anticipated. So the GMSL inputs allows you to directly ingest video data to the GPU, so you don't need to worry about the heightened latency of something like a USB. Base T1 Ethernet means if you're already in an automotive platform, you can effectively connect it up to the base T1 network around the vehicle, which reduces the need for adapters or anything like that. So having hardware that already supports all this stuff natively means they don't need to worry about any of this kind of external noise that can slow down development cycles.
That makes a lot of sense, David. And I guess that a good starting place was to call Chris as well, right? So,
Absolutely.
yeah, I feel like, we have such expertise between both of our companies that, we can definitely help people get to where they need to be. So, Chris, like from where you sit with customers, is the heavy equipment industry actually ready for physical AI, or is the market excitement ahead of the reality on the ground?
That's a tough question. I would say, each company is a little different. Some of them have very large ideas of what's possible. And I think, David's comment about, hey, this is what the hardware, there's limitations. There's, especially when you're not connected to the whole network. You don't have a solid network connection. There are some limitations in terms of how much, compute you can do. But once you can kind of educate them, and this is really where, Macnica as well as Connectech, I mean, that's part of what we do is we try to educate the customers as to what's really possible here. And the beauty of the Connectech line too is he just mentioned it, the ability to shift in different pieces, the modular base of, hey, I can put in one camera, I can put in two cameras, I can go four cameras. Having a lot of flexibility allows you to address a lot of different opportunities. So I think right now, the markets in general, everybody's trying to figure out where this fits and what they can do with it and trying to quantize what that looks like. And I would say, the nice thing really about the Falcon is it takes it from, oh, we get these dev boards and we're going to try and ruggedize this dev board to be our product. Yeah, it doesn't work that way. I mean, it takes, you mentioned, the 40 plus years of experience they've got in building, heat sinks and dealing with the heat, dealing with all of these things. You now have a product now that, hey, this product is ready. So forget all the science fiction of, hey, maybe we can build this. It's like, hey, this is ready. You can start using it for deployments and things like that. So I think, to me, I think the next year, 18 months, it's going to be a real exciting time in this space. And this kind of product really enables that just tremendously.
It's amazing. It's amazing how fast the world is moving right now. Like it's really incredible. Have either of you seen deployment outcomes or expect to see at something that was impossible, a year ago, 2, 3 years ago?
Yeah, I can jump on that one. I think more and more, especially as we're seeing CTI labs really coming online, we're seeing a lot of surprise from customers at just how capable these modules are. We are pushing it to the absolute limits of what's possible, and we're really on the cutting edge of the technology of NVIDIA's kind of software toolkits and whatnot. And anytime I've been on calls with customers in the CTI Labs team, there's always a lot of surprise at just how much we're able to do with a relatively very small module. Like you don't need an AGX in all cases. You can get away with an OR and an X depending on the application. And I think a lot of people are surprised to see just how capable that module is, even more so now with super mode.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. Just cognizant of time, I'm just going to wrap this up a little bit. So, David, what does success look like for Falcon 2 years from now?
That's a good question. I would love to see customer success stories. Ultimately, I think the team at ConnectTech knows how capable this system is, and as we start seeing wider adoption of the platform, getting feedback from customers on is the AMP seal working for you? How are you finding the T1 Ethernets? Is having that connectivity natively available on the platform providing the benefit that we expect? So I think that kind of wide scale adoption into the environments like mining and construction would be really fantastic to see. It's always really nice to hear the success stories, and I hope we start seeing a couple of those roll out in the next 2 years.
Definitely. I think it's going to be like it is right now with AI. All of a sudden it sort of crept up on us and boom, there it is, right? And then, it's interesting to find out where we're actually going to be 6 months from now, let alone a year from now. The world is just changing so quickly, and it's very, very interesting when you sit back and sort of take a look at it. I have one more question for Chris. So if an engineer is watching this and they're shortlisting Edge AI platforms for their next, let's say, vehicle program, what's the one thing you want them to walk away knowing?
I think, the one thing I would want engineers to take away from this is that, this Falcon product is not a lab demo. It's not just a powerful lab demo. It was built and designed to survive and perform on real machines in scary environments. Rugged scalability, integration, it's all built in there. And honestly, the team behind you, this is what Macnica does. This is what ConnectTech does. There to make you successful from your pilot all the way through to production and deployment.
Thank you so much. Thanks, both of you. Thanks, David. Thanks, Chris, for joining us today on the call. To anyone that's listening to this, if you have any questions, there's a comment section below. Just drop them in the comment section, or you can reach out to David or Chris. We'll put their contact details also in the comment section on how you can find them. This is a very exciting time. We'd love to hear from you if you are deploying Falcon. And we'll catch up with you soon. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for taking the time, both. Thank you.
Thank you.